Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, it's Jackie Cation, and you are listening to The Dork Forest. The website's JackieCation.com, DorkForest.com, TheDorkForest.com if you like a determiner. Let's do the credits. Patrick Brady's going to fix this audio and video. Vilmos works on JackieCation.com, and Mike Rickberg sang the song with his wife, Sarah. He composed it, and he will sing his version of the Mexican hat dance at the end of this show. Thank you so much for listening to The Dork Forest. Here's a scoop. I'm doing stand-up online. A lot of Zoom shows will eventually go back on the road. Sign up for my email list. It's easy to get off. It's harder to get on than it is to get off. And no harm, no foul. If ever bored, JackieCation.com, sign up for the email list. You'll find out about my weekly Zoom shows and stand up on the road eventually. You may donate to the show if you would like. I would like. Sure, I would. There's PayPal, Jackie at JackieCation.com, and there is a PayPal button on both DorkForest.com and JackieCation.com. And there's Venmo, if you like Venmo, Jackie-Cation, oddly enough. If you have listened to all of the shows, go to dorkforest.bandcamp.com, I think. The Dork Forest has a Bandcamp page. You can listen to a lot of ones that are free from pre-2009 when I started pre-recording. And then there's live episodes that cost me a couple of bucks, so I charge you a couple of bucks. There's also some stand-up. There's a story album that's very exciting there. And other than that, I have a lot of merch in my garage. Feel free to order if you know anybody who doesn't have any CDs or the DVD. And you can follow me everywhere at Jackie Cation. Let's get into the show. Hi, I'm Jackie Cation, and I am in my garage with Scott Rogers. You're back. This is Scott, your third time, Scott Rogers, on the program.
I think this is four, actually. Yeah, I did. I did
Disney,
Disneyland, and I did action figures, Star Wars action figures, and I appeared.
The ones where you make modulated ones or modified
custom
ones.
Cut them apart, make new ones. Yeah, and then and have we talked about board games yet?
We have. We did at least one about board games. I don't remember what the fourth one was. That was
the fourth
my big
was
thing.
the Venture Brothers appearance.
When
Andy and I were in character, this was pre everything, right? Like in the dark days where we were using cans with strings to talk to each other.
Right. Oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yes, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna just go. You know what I just did? I just swapped our positions on my recording thing on Zoom because that was fun for me. Okay, I'm back because. So what do we want to? But I didn't even ask you. I just know that you are a multifaceted diamond of a dork.
Yeah, I'm chock full of dork. I don't know. There's a lot of things that I was thinking of. I was thinking of kind of comic books in general. Although you do have a lot of people on to talk about comic books. Although I do consider myself I guess I can't call myself amateur anymore, but I'm a Batman historian. That's what I sometimes call myself. And I've actually been paid, usually in toys, which is probably maybe a better way to get paid. I don't know. Is it better to get paid in toys?
Depends on the market, my friend. Depends on the market. That's right.
That is very true. But yeah, I've been a lifetime Batman fan since before I could read, and Batman is probably the reason why I can read, is because I picked up comics and was like, what are these things coming out of these people's mouths? I want to know.
Oh, words. Words, you said to yourself. I understand that.
I didn't know what the word for word was, so they were. And then I forced myself to learn how to read. I mean, I had parents that were somewhat engaged, and I had an older brother who I think contributed a lot. And then, of course, there was like school. But I went to like a Montessori school. I don't even know if those exist anymore or not. Is that now been outlawed?
No,
Oh,
no,
do they
they're
really?
there. Yeah, I have a friend of
okay.
mine who owns one in Minneapolis.
The Montessori school, I would just go and they'd be like, "What do you want to do today?" And I'd be like, "I want to sit in the back of the building and just read books." And that's all. But nobody was sitting there
and
saying,
Batman books.
well, no, it was like Peter Pan, and I actually burned through the classics pretty early as a kid. I read like to the point where now, many years. I'm not a kid anymore. Many
What?
years, many years later, I will watch a movie and I'll be like, "This sounds really familiar," and then I'll say, "Oh, it's based on a book," and I'll be like, "Oh, I read that book." Okay, and it happens
Had
all
the
the time.
same experience with Bridgerton. You guys,
Yeah,
what's
I haven't
happening?
seen that yet, but is that based on a book?
It's based on a series, and it's a romance series, and
Oh, of course.
it is hilariously. It's actually in the world of romance novels. It is actually quite. It's one of the funner ones. It's just a fun, light. You've read A Small Angry Planet, and then have you read? Or Damn, Just One Thing After Another. There's a bunch of sort of science fiction that are super light.
Okay.
And
Is this like 50s era like Bradbury Heinlein, or is this modern?
now? Yeah,
Oh,
it's
no,
just
I'm not familiar
okay.
with those.
Yeah, there's a bunch of books that are that I think, and this isn't fair. It's not fair for me to talk about Julia Quinn, who wrote the Bridgerton series, because have I read a novel? Written a novel? I have not. But they're written. They're lightly written. They feel like
They're breezy.
they're pretty breezy, and there's science fiction like that, and there's romance like that, and there's mysteries like that, and Bridgerton is actually quite fun. It's historical, but it's not historically accurate. Like there's
Right.
there's different kinds of historical romances and even historical fiction, but whatever.
All I know about Bridgerton, my wife and my daughter watch it. All I know is every time I walk by the TV set, somebody's fucking. That's all I know about Bridgerton.
It's a romance novel. You're
It's a
hoping that
sex
they're
novel.
fucking.
It's a sex novel. It's not even There's a lot of noises that come out of the other room. I'm busy, doing something, usually
You're
making
busy
a board
being
game.
the dad and going, I'm not watching this with my daughter. And that's what we like about you, Scott Rogers. And
Puritanical.
well, just there's a certain point where you're just like, I don't need to. I mean, I'm happy that the children in my life see these things and that they grow up to have lovely, full sexual interactions with consenting adults.
One day they will.
I don't necessarily need to know about it, hear about it, and whatever. And I hope that it happens at college. That's what I tell them. I was like,
exactly.
If you
as long as it
can wait till
happens out
college,
of the house, that's all I care about. No,
yeah, that'd be ideal.
Actually, I have my son is at the age where he still doesn't, engaging with him on anything about other than Yu-Gi-Oh is is a bit of an effort. But my daughter, bless them, we actually have a good relationship. We talk about a lot of that stuff, and once in a blue moon we will talk about the sexual things. But
Sure,
I'm still a dad. I still get embarrassed about it.
Right, and getting embarrassed about it doesn't mean you're unwilling to talk about it. It just means you're slightly embarrassed about it. And you can power through it if she needs someone to talk to about some bullshit. You're like, yeah, no, we can talk about it. I'm just going to be over here blushing a little bit and then going, you'll be an adult. Anyway, so here's what I want to know.
Well, the fun part about it is, last note is that I say, you do realize I had a life before you came along, right? That's what I always tell them.
She doesn't want to hear it either.
Yeah, no, exactly. I didn't know this, she'll say. They'll say.
Yes. Here's my scoop. Will we discuss Batman? Because here I had someone talk about Superman and how much he liked Superman. Just in passing, he said how much he liked Superman more.
Was Mark Waid, the living encyclopedia of Superman?
It was,
that was a good
but
episode.
that's not the one that I'm talking about. It was the one before that. And I can't remember. It was a comic and a very good person.
Well, I have to warn you, I'm no Mark Waid.
Right.
And the other thing I want to say about Mark Waid is what I find really amusing is his favorite Superman story is also my daughter's favorite Superman story, which is that Superman owes $1 billion. So you should one day talk to Evelyn about Superman and particularly Supergirl, because they are an expert on like '50s Superman stuff, which is pretty funny.
Okay. Oh,
But
that's
anyway,
fun.
back to
But
me,
back
who is
to
more
you,
of a
Scott
I'm more of
Rogers.
I'm a Batman guy. There's
You're
a
a
difference.
Batman guy.
There
What
is.
is
I mean,
the
it's
difference?
the difference is you like Batman. I mean,
And thanks for listening to the Dork Forest, you guys. See you guys later.
shortest episode ever. Yes. No. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely a person. It's a Coke and Pepsi thing, right? It's kind of sometimes it's a little hard to elucidate.
But,
For me,
so
yeah.
Batman was made in the 30s, right? Or something? Or
Yeah,
the 40s?
So the story goes, Superman comes out in 1938, is this huge hit. And the guy who runs what eventually becomes DC Comics, his name is like Major Malcolm Wheeler or something like that. He says, I need another Superman because I like making money. And so Bob Kane, who was kind of a mediocre cartoonist, but he lived in New York, and I guess he like hung around. He was doing like kind of cartoony strips mostly for DC, like kind of the equivalent of like Popeye, like Thimble Theater ripoffs, right? Like anyway, he goes, I can come up with a Superman. Give me a weekend. And so the story goes, he goes home and he says, well, Superman, he looks like this. I'll do the opposite. I'll make it a guy that kind of is like a bat. And so he draws up this, he essentially traces a Flash Gordon image and he puts bat wings on it and puts like a little domino mask. And so if you can imagine Mr. Incredible with bat wings and no logo on his chest, that's essentially the character he created and went, ta-da, here is Batman. And so then he shows it to his pal, who's this guy. These guys are all kids, remember. They're like maybe, I don't know, like 17, 18, 19 years old. Like they're like fresh out of high school. And he shows it to his friend, this writer friend of his named Bill Finger. And he says, Bill Finger, what do you think of the Batman? And Bill Finger goes, ugh, what? That's not a Batman. That's like a guy in his underwear with bat wings. Come on, we can do better than this. So Bill Finger says, well, he's a bat. Let's put him in like a hood and give the hood bat ears. So he looks like looks more like a bat. And instead of putting him in a red costume, let's put him in a gray costume and let's put a bat on his chest to show that he's a Batman. And let's give him a belt full of stuff that he can use to help him fight. And let's give him, let's have him live in this city, Gotham City. And let's give him a friend who is the police commissioner. And so that way he can be this dilettante and kind of like hang out with Commissioner Gordon and smoke cigarettes or pipes actually, and then find out, oh, whoa, really? There's a crime going on? Oh, well, I'm going to go and, I'm going to go to bed now. And then of course Batman shows up and kicks the shit out of the bad guys, right?
So the second guy
Bill
is
Finger,
the guy who is like, he doesn't have superpowers. He has a belt.
Well, they both were like, the thing that they liked about it was Batman didn't have superpowers, and that was like the distinguishing difference. And these kids were like, we want to make a character that's like the Shadow, who was really popular back then, right? He was on the radio, or the Scarlet Pimpernel is another, the fop by day, hero by night, that idea, right? And so they pulled on all this stuff that they loved, all these books and movies and radio shows that they listened to, and they and then there was a movie called The Bat Whispers that in it there's a bad guy and he wears like a bat mask and he shines a signal on the wall and it has a bat on it, and so they take that idea, right? So they're just ripping off ideas from everywhere and putting it into this new character. And so what was
the name of the movie?
The Bat Whispers.
Thank you.
And it's from like 1932 or 4, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Anyway, so Kane goes back to DC, to National, and he says, here's my idea, here's the Batman, and this guy goes, I love it, let's do it. And he goes, all right, let's write up a contract. And Kane goes, great, I came up with this idea all by myself, and I want my name to always be on the comic strip in perpetuity. Kane's dad was a lawyer, and so it helped him. So he screwed out Finger of the credits, but Finger Finger was, by all accounts, was kind of this, very. He was very able to push. People were able to push him around. And he also had a drinking problem later in life and stuff like that. So he wasn't a guy to really defend himself. And so he just kind of put up with it. And so an entire literally this lie went on about Batman's creation all the way through the 60s.
What happened wait, so Fingers, and I want to call him Fingers McGillicuddy.
Bill Finger. He wrote Batman. He wrote like
how did we find out that he was the one?
The fans found out. The fans, first of all, so a couple of interesting things happen. So Finger creates, for the most part, the majority of Batman's mythology. He not only creates like Gotham City and the Batmobile and things like that, but he helps create the Joker. Although there's a bit of a debate about who is the originator of the Joker. There's an artist named Jerry Robinson who was like another kid that Kane is a mediocre artist at best. And so very quickly,
Kane's the bad guy in this story. Holy
Kane is a son of a bitch. Nobody in the comic industry liked him at all. And what he would do is he would hire these guys, and essentially they would ghost write and ghost draw for him, and then he'd sign his name with this big signature with a big O, and it's in a square so you can't miss it, and it's Batman created by Bob Kane. And this, and because of and DC's like, well, we got to do it. It's in the contract. We signed the contract.
Right.
So this goes on. So Finger creates Catwoman. He creates more or less the Joker. He creates Riddler. He creates Robin. He creates Scarecrow. He creates Penguin. He creates every major Two-Face. He creates every major character from the Batman mythology and the world. And he also comes up with the gimmicks like Batman fighting on a giant typewriter, which is like a real staple of 1940s comics. And things like Batman having different suits. You know, I'm going to be in the snow, so I'm going to wear a white suit. I'm in the dark, I'm going to wear a phosphorescent suit so the bad guys think I'm a ghost. Things like that.
We don't know. We know that Bob Kane didn't come up with these things.
No. Kane was just cashing the checks.
Stable of writers and artists.
And artists, yeah. There were a couple other artists. There was a fellow named Charlie Paris who would do all the backgrounds. Even to this day, but in the early days of comics are always done kind of like an assembly line. So Kane in the earlier days, like maybe the first 5 or 10 years or so, he would like draw Batman's face. Yeah. And then have everybody else do the rest. And so like they would draw, other guys would like draw the body, and then Charlie Paris would do the backgrounds, and Finger, of course, would write it, and they'd have another dude letter it. And when Batman became popular, he was now in 1939 is Detective Comics 27. That's the first appearance of Batman. Okay. Then a year later, the character is so popular, they give him his own book, which is Batman #1. And so that's the first appearance of the Joker. It's the first appearance of Catwoman. And a few months before Robin, or maybe a month before Robin had first appeared. So this is like the famous cover of them swinging on this kind of yellow background. And my advice is, if you ever are going to buy a comic for investment purposes, that's the comic to buy. I think the most recent one one just sold for like $2 million.
And how many are left in the world? Do you think?
There's still a fair amount. I mean, okay. Well, no. Remember, these things back in the heyday of the 30s and the 40s, comics were being produced by the millions. Like an average monthly run were millions of comics. It's nothing like today. We're lucky if there's maybe 10,000 books, an issue. But back then, comics was the huge entertainment. You know, like kids read them, the GIs read them, adults read them. Like everybody was reading comics, right? But there were also a bazillion types of comics. Like, I mean, there are nowadays, of course, manga and even if you go into like Earth 2, our buddy Carr's store, right? Mm-hmm. There's different sections. But in the early days of comics, like they were just trying everything. There were stories about crime, there was horror, there was romance, there was funny cartoon animals, all types of things like that. So the industry was very broad at the time, and there was tons of things to select from.
So there's still a bunch of them out there, this Batman #1, but one got sold for $2 million.
Yeah, that's because it was a nice quality one, and you can, I think if you buy like a really beat up one, you still are paying like $300,000 for it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which makes me sad because as a kid, I grew up in San Diego, and I used to go to Comic-Con all the time. And I was just watching a video the other day of these two guys at the 1973 Comic-Con. in New York, though, not in San Diego. And they had a copy of Batman #1, and it was a little beat up. It had like a tear on the cover, and it was missing some pages. And they were selling it for $175. And I was like, no. Well, that was like 3 years before I started going to cons. But still, that's like I could have bought a Batman number if I were smart.
You could have been there.
I could have bought one for probably about $300 to $500 back then, which is a steal, right? But, you know.
If you had, Scott Rogers, a Batman #1 and it was in pretty good shape, all the pages and everything, what would you do with it?
I would read it. Of course I would. I wear gloves, but
you'd wear gloves, but then would you display it or would you just put it in Mylar in a box?
No, fuck that. That's horrible. That's like, anyway, I would have it in a safe storage, but I would have it accessible. Like I'd have it maybe in like a glass box, but I
like
could open the box. Yeah. But I'd be able to open the box and like go, hey, you know what? F it. It's, you know, my yearly read of Batman #1, which is funny because I would go to, there's a great comic store in New York called Metropolis Comics, and they did a lot of conventions in the before times. And I would go every year at San Diego Comic-Con, I would go to Metropolis Comics and I would pretend like I was rich, and I'd be like, I'm interested in perusing your Batman #1. And the guy would pull it out and he'd show it to me, and he'd page through the pages to show me the quality of it. And I always would call it my annual smelling of the Batman #1 because
you didn't get to touch it, or
no, I didn't get to touch it at all because it's thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
But I would want to bask in the presence of this vintage. And you know how old paper has that really weird grandpa smell to it, right? So I would sniff in the Batman #1, and I would pretend like I was rich for a moment, and then I would walk off, and they were none the wiser.
Until this very day.
Until this very moment, yes.
That's awesome. It's okay. So that's sort of the origin of Batman. When did you get into Batman?
By birth? No. So like everybody my age, I'm older. I'm in my 50s. So I discovered it through the Batman TV series, the Adam West show. Okay. But it was in reruns. So I was born in the late 60s, and the show came out in 1966. And it ran for 3 seasons, and then it got unceremoniously canceled. And so my mother has story, like I saw this reruns on TV, and I like lost my mind. And then I realized there were, comic books and merchandise. So I remember, as a very small child, I still have them, little cup and bowls and plate set that has like Batman and the Joker, on them. So you can eat your cream of wheat and see the Joker at the bottom.
And this is the Adam West version that you first got into.
So the plate and the bowl that I had actually is the artwork is from the comics, because they didn't really it was kind of rare back then for them to use artwork inspired by the TV show. The only thing that I can think of off the top of my head that was art visually kind of like the TV show was there were some trading cards from around that, kind of like Tops, like Mars Attacks or those those look a lot like Adam West and Burt Ward. But almost everything else used artwork from the comics because it had already been made. They don't have to pay anybody. They would just cut it and photostat it and you're done and you make your money. And so the plates that I had artwork from an artist who was he was considered by the fans at the time to be the finger quote, the good Batman artist. And this was an artist named Dick Sprang. And Dick Sprang is, his style is very distinct. It's kind of blocky. Remember when Mark Waid was talking about an artist named Kurt Swan? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
So Kurt Swan was the good Superman artist. Dick Sprang was the good Batman artist in the 40s and the 50s, early 50s. And so the art on the plate and the cup and the bowl that I had was Dick Sprang art. And so that's the version for me that and it's also, if you remember the opening credits of the Batman TV show, the cartoon, that's Dick Sprang style, right?
Okay.
So that was, for me, I love Batman. I love most versions of Batman, but my version of Batman is Dick Sprang. That's the one I love. What's considered the Golden Age version of Batman, and the Golden Age is kind of a wonky classification system that comic book store owners and people who collect comic books use. There's the Golden Age, which is from the mid 30s to the late 50s, early 60s. Then there's the Silver Age, which is the 60s through roughly the 70s, like the early 70s. Then there's the Bronze Age. Now, why they decided to pick Olympic medals, it makes no sense. It is the stupidest rating system or grading system I've ever heard of. Personally,
but it's in now. Yeah.
Well, it is. It's been around for a long time, but I use my own classification that nobody will ever use. But for me, I call it Golden Age because it's like, the Golden Age of television or the Golden Age of radio. Then the Silver Age, okay, Silver Age, things are starting to mature. Then for me, I call the 70s the Super Age because superheroes were everywhere. That was like the big boom in superheroes, right? You had Spider-Man on the Electric Company. You had, you could buy, orange juice with Batman on it. You could get, lunch boxes, whatever, right? Like it inundated pop culture. The word super was showing up all over the place. The logo, the Superman logo. And then the 80s is called, so this is where it gets weird in the comic rating system, is the Bronze Age kind of lasts through the late 80s, kind of right around where Dark Knight Returns and Crisis on Infinite Earths, which are two DC titles, very famous titles. But then after that, everything is like the modern age. And it's like, have we been in the modern age since the late 80s? What? Like, Are we in the postmodern age? Like what? So myself, I've come up with other things like the Dark Ages is the 90s because partially all the heroes go very dark and they're gritty and they all talk like Christian Bale, if you're going to read them to your kids. And then, of course, then we get into like the 2000s is a very nostalgic age. There's a lot of old characters coming back, like Barry Allen, the Flash, who had been dead since the 80s, and Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, who had been dead since the early 90s. And so all these characters are kind of getting reinvigorated. So we're in kind of a new age now. I don't have my own classification for it yet. I haven't thought about it. But I think that there's a better system that could be made for that.
Right. When did the Batman the Animated Series that Mark Hamill did the Joker voice of?
That's 1992. It comes out right between the 89 Batman movie, the one that everybody knows and loves, the Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson one.
Right.
And then the movie Batman Returns, the weirdo Catwoman, Penguin, Christopher Walken one, that came out in 92, I think. And so the animated series kind of was developed between the two movies. So if you look at the designs of some of the things, it kind of reminds you of the movies a little bit, like the Batmobile kind of reminds you a little bit, and some of the costumes, tiny bit, I guess. But a lot of Bruce Timm's influences are actually those Dick Sprang versions. Like if you particularly when they jump from the Batman the Animated Series lasts, I think it's 2 seasons or 3 seasons, and then they change it to the New Batman Adventures.
Okay.
No, it's the Adventures of Batman and Robin, and then the New Batman Adventures. Okay. And so the new Batman Adventures, which is like technically the 3rd or 4th season of the cartoon, has like some of the character designs are very Dick Sprang inspired. Like the Penguin, very much a Dick Sprang style. It's not the weird, freaky Danny DeVito with, webbed up fingers and creepy, he's got fish guts hanging off of his mouth and all that. He's very elegant. He looks like the inspiration of the Penguin is a couple of things, but one of them is this ad for Cool cigarettes, which is this penguin that's wearing a tuxedo and a top hat. And so the Bill Finger saw that, and he back in the day. So there's a great story about Bill Finger and then also Dick Sprang and a lot of these old time artists. They would have what's called clip files. And so if they saw, if they were going to do a story and let's say Bill Finger says, all right, we're going to do the story and the Joker is going to go try to steal Roman coins. And so what he would do is he would dig through old National Geographics and Life magazines and whatever, and then clip out, and he would send those to the artists and go, all right, this is what I'm talking about. So, this is all pre-Google Images, right?
Right.
This is why, in my opinion, Google Images is one of the greatest inventions in humanity, at least for the entertainment, for the arts, right?
Yeah.
So these guys would do Finger was known for doing these meticulously crafted, very clever, like there's a formula to a Bill Finger story. Like if you read enough of these comics, you can see the
hang on a
pattern.
second. The garbage truck is going by, which I kind of want to. I think that people don't need it. Is
It's
what
so
I'm saying.
appropriate. We're talking about comic books, and then there comes the garbage truck.
There.
It sounds like some wind is getting in. Also,
Yeah. Well, the door's open so that the
okay.
my new tiny dog can come and go as he wants.
Right.
Because it's hard to boss a new dog. I mean, you want to be steady. But,
you don't want to bully him though.
Yeah. He's just trying to figure some stuff out.
Right.
So okay, I want to be a good sport because he's a good sport. Okay. Anyway, so there's this thing with cool cigarettes and Bill Finger.
Yeah. So he gets inspired by this ad, this penguin in this ad, and this is the inspiration for the character, the penguin. And so anyway, this is one of the reasons why Bill Finger is such a great. When I found out about these guys pretty early on because I grew up in San Diego. This meant I could meet a lot of these artists. Now I never met Bill Finger. He had actually passed away before I was going to shows, and I had a chance to meet Bob Kane. As a matter of fact, the reason why I first went to San Diego Comic-Con was because of Bob Kane. My dad knew I liked Batman, and he said, "Oh, I found out that the guy who created Batman, because everybody didn't know better, was going to be at this Comic-Con." So my family, this is 1976 or 7, so probably, or 5, I forget, somewhere around there, before Star Wars came out. We trundle up into the car. We live in Escondido, which is, an hour north of San Diego. We drive all the way down to San Diego. We get to this Comic-Con. We pay for our tickets. We go in. We go charging up this staircase. I'll never forget it. We go charging up this staircase to this ballroom on the second floor, and we run into the room where Bob Kane is supposed to be, and they say, "You just missed him by 5 minutes."
Oh, right.
So we were like, crap. So we wandered around Comic-Con, and I bought a couple of comic books, and I went, wow, this is amazing. I want to come back to this next year. And so that was the start of I think I'm now, other than this year and then 2 years in which I had my children, I think from 1976 to 2019, I have missed 3 Comic-Cons.
Right.
So I've gone to this a lot. Anyway, so that's how I found out that there were people that made these things. That here's the name that I'm reading in the comic. It's an actual person. So then I would go down and I would start to find out. Well, I love comics. I'm like, I want to work in comics, and so I would start to talk to these guys that worked in comic books. I'd meet guys like Jack Kirby and Will Eisner and Carl Barks and John Romita Sr.
So you got to meet, and these are icons. These are like these are like the big deal guys.
But
in
here's the
comic
great
books.
thing.
But you're a kid, right?
I didn't know they were big deals. Like I knew Jack Kirby drew weird stuff, and he was always a little scary to me. He was always kind of scary looking, and so I didn't really interact with him too much, just a little bit. Carl Barks, I knew he drew Donald Duck, and I already knew I liked Mickey and Donald and stuff from Disneyland. And he actually was the father-in-law of like a lawyer friend of my dad's. And the lawyer had like this gorgeous...
That's the crazy thing about growing up in California, especially Los Angeles or San Diego or any of these things.
Yeah.
That you meet these children who are like, I used to hang out with Cary Grant. And you're like, what's happening? And so
exactly.
like in Wisconsin, not an option, you guys. Anyway,
right.
But this is neat.
Well, yes. I won't tell you the story of how I was babysat by Scatman Crothers. I'll save that for another time. But anyway, so I knew Carl Barks through his son-in-law and the Romitas. They just were really friendly, and I think I was like a 13-year-old kid, and they invited me to spend the afternoon just hanging out with them. So
wow.
I would show them my art, and they were like, "This is not bad. You're if you keep working on this, maybe you can get a career in comics." But the funny thing is, I would meet all these guys, and they would also, in the course of me either hanging out and just eavesdropping or them talking to me, I would start to hear all these horror stories about working in the comic book industry, how everybody was getting ripped off, how everybody's getting underpaid, how they would, how Marvel was like not giving their art back, or DC was ripping them off, and then I found out that, over time that, Bob Kane didn't create all this stuff for Batman. That was Bill Finger, and that was Jerry Robinson, and that was all these other guys. And then it was around the same time I started reading, like, occasionally I'd pick up like a fan-made thing, like a fan magazine or something, and they'd start talking about this stuff and saying, oh, no, this is the real story. And they were always, it was a little less scandalous. But
it's comic book gossip, Scott Rogers.
Yeah. I was like 13 years old getting gossip too. It was hilarious. So I found out pretty early that Bill Finger was the co-creator of Batman and that he never really got credit for it. And so by the time back in 1989 rolls around and Bob Kane shows up to do a victory lap for the Batman movie. And by the time I had an opportunity to actually meet him, I had no desire to meet him because I knew what an asshole he was. And I'm like, I don't want to meet that guy. So I never met Bob Kane.
Okay.
Yeah. So I never got to meet the creator of either creator of Batman, which is a bit of a bummer for me, but whatever,
So and then when did you start getting the action figures and did you get the cars and the?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So the action figure it's 1972 or 3. So I'm like 5 years old, maybe 4 years old, probably about 5 years old. And we're in this mall and I'm with, I'm too, I'm in kindergarten or I'm still too young to go to school. And so my mom and I are at this mall and my brother is in school and we're like kind of killing time. And this lady walks by holding this kid who's like a little younger than me. So maybe like a year or two younger than me. And in his hand, he is gripping a Batman Mego action figure, the first removable cowl Batman. And I see it and I go, where did you get that? Because there is, other than Captain Action, which I was too young to have had, there was nothing like this. There were no, action figures. There was G.I. Joe, Barbie, and that was pretty much it.
And what's Mego? Is that the name of the company? Or
so yeah, Mego is the name of the company. It's
how do you spell
it's
it?
fun. MEGO.
Oh, okay.
And they were a really interesting toy company. They pioneered a lot of really great toys. They were one of the first companies to really, how like Funko has like every license now.
Yeah.
That was Mego in the 70s. Like Mego had they made Star Trek figures, they made Planet of the Apes figures, they made Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and Captain America. They were like doing Marvel and DC at the same time.
Oh wow.
So it was pretty innovative. And the figures were great. They were like 8-inch tall, articulated figures that had cloth costumes and plastic, like belts and masks and these very funny oven mitt type gloves that they would have on. Mm-hmm. And so I saw this Batman and I'm like, oh my God, where Batman action figure? What the hell? And so my mom, who is very gregarious, thank God, runs over and says, where did you find this action figure? And my mom and the lady says, oh, we were at this store TGNY, and they had them there. And so my mom ran me over there because thank God my mother indulged and spoiled me as a child. And
you were loved.
I was loved. And I picked up a Batman and a Robin because there were only 4 characters introduced with that set. It was Superman, Aquaman, Batman, and Robin. Okay. And the Batman and Robin had removable cowls, so you could take them off, and underneath was Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson, which was awesome. So now you can play with them either undercover or at least just hanging out in the Batcave being Kaz or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I still have my Batman, my removable mask Batman to this day, but my Robin, my older brother, who was always, for lack of a better term, destroying toys to find out how they worked. He grabbed my Robin and wishboned it. He essentially pulled the legs and there was a rubber band inside and it snapped and the whole figure just literally fell apart. And back then we didn't know better that we could try to repair them or anything like that. So I just threw it away. And that removable mask Robin is worth like a shit ton of money nowadays, right? An original one, enough. Of course, right? That's the way it always goes. But I ended up getting a replacement and this one had a mask actually painted on it. Like later they made a version where the masks didn't come off, because I guess kids were losing him and parents were complaining or something. And but then they would also made like the Joker, and they made Catwoman and Penguin and Riddler, and then a bunch of other characters like Green Arrow and Wonder Woman and Batgirl and things like that. So those were like that. Those were kind of my before Star Wars figures came out in '78. Those were like the things I played with all the time were those Batman figures. So I was, between the comic books and then the figures and the TV show, and I would have pajamas and, you name it. I was Batman crazy, whatever I could get my hands on back in those days. Cause the other thing is that Batman in the '70s, before those Mego figures came out, my mom would go around and say, my son loves Batman. Where can I get Batman stuff? There used to be a ton of Batman stuff in the '60s. What happened? And my mom has this story where she goes to this guy, asks him this, and the store guy goes, "Lady, Batman's passé."
Well, and then he came back in '89.
And then he came back.
I thought that Jack Nicholson made an excellent Joker, and he was just he was the right amount of creepy for me. And because I liked the TV show kind of the best. I liked,
Cesar Romero.
Yeah, it was, and it was like the best statement I've ever heard about Batman. The Adam West version was that Batman's superpower was that he was the only adult in Gotham City.
Yeah, I love that.
And
that's great.
Yeah, and that was from the pre-Mark Waid Batman episode of the Dork Forest, whose name I am. Even though I spent a week on the road with this guy, what the hell's that guy's name?
Could have been Batman.
And maybe he was secretly, but I think he liked it was about Superman, but what he said in passing was that was his favorite thing about Batman. Anyways.
There's a funny cartoon that, I forget who drew it. It might've been like Evan Dorkin or someone, but essentially it was like Superman secretly wishes he was Batman and Batman secretly wishes he was Superman. It's like that's why they get along, they did and then they didn't and then they did. And now I think they do now again, thank goodness.
Okay.
But yeah, they, I think that they both, that's the reason why they hang out with each other is because they both want to be each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so what did, so now there's cartoons and there's movies. We're in the late 80s, right?
Video. Oh yeah. Well, before that, there's a big, so like, how I say the 70s is the super era, the super, every superheroes are everywhere. There's a cartoon series. There's several cartoon series. There's one made by Filmation, which is kind of inspired and voiced by the same, at least Adam West and Burt Ward, that do, that are cartoons with these two actors doing the voices. And then there's another series that's a little sillier that has kind of a Batmite character in it. That's kind of like, remember the Great Garzoo from Flintstones?
Yeah.
Essentially it was that, right? Like Batmite is kind of this weird character from the late 50s, early 60s, where he's this interdimensional pain in the ass, kind of like Mr. Mxyzptlk. And so he shows up and he's supposedly like Batman's biggest fan, but he's always testing. He's like, Batmite's like the worst girlfriend. He's like always trying to test his love. Like, Batman, prove to me that you're the best superhero. And it's like, Batman goes through all this rigmarole and then finally proves that he's awesome. And then the next time Batmite shows up again, he's like, Batman, prove to me you're the best superhero. It's like wasn't that enough the first time? Come on, give me a break, kid.
It's just like, if I died, would you date again, Batman?
Batman says, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So the comic is kind of chugging along and it's popular. And by this point, Batman is in 3 comic books, which the only other character to do this is Superman. And the books are Detective Comics, which originally started as an anthology series, and then Batman just took it over. Like, they just were like, forget all these other characters. Let's just make it all Batman all the time. And then he's got the regular book Batman, and then he's got a third book called World's Finest, which originally was kind of separate stories. Like, one story was a Batman story, one story was a Superman story, and then they just said, why don't we just have them hang out and team up? And so then it became all these stories of Superman and Batman hanging out, and then they get weird. The World Finest stories get weird because usually like every third issue, Batman is either trying to kill Superman or Superman's trying to kill Batman, or they have teenage sons and those kids are trying to kill them because they're old or whatever. Like it gets really odd. And then around the late 70s, there's kind of this thing called the DC Explosion, which is a ton of books that get released by DC, and two of them are Batman related. Well, three of them are Batman related. One is Batman Family, which is a anthology book that is mostly reprints, but there's the lead story is a Batgirl Robin story. So like Batgirl and Robin they're it's kind of like moonlighting. Like they're kind of like, will they or won't they? There's a little bit of romantic, but it's the 70s, so nobody's gonna have sex or anything like that. And then, but the neat thing about the Batman Family is it does all these reprints from the 40s and the 50s, and this is where I read a lot of these old Dick Sprang stories and stuff like that for the first time is through these reprints in Batman Family. Then there's a Joker comic that lasts about 9 issues where he's essentially, it's like the Joker just being a dick, and like every issue is like Joker teaming up with Lex Luthor, Joker teaming up with the Creeper, Joker teaming up or fighting against Green Arrow or whatever. So it's like all these weird combinations. And then there's another book. There's a very short-lived Man-Bat book. I think it lasts like 2 issues. And then the other one. Oh wait, it was just right on the tip of my tongue.
You know what's on the tip of your tongue, Scott Rogers? A lot of Batman information, and it's fantastic.
Well, that's about 70% of my brain matter is actually Batman. It's got the logo branded on the brain. The wrinkles have formed a bat signal in my brain. God damn, what was the other Batman book? There was another one. Somebody, I'm sorry. I'd be the one screaming at me in the car. Right. And now I know how it feels. Well, anyway, there was another Batman title as well, and Brave and the Bold, of course. Brave and the Bold is the Batman team-up book. So it's Batman with Wonder Woman, or Batman with Wildcat, or Batman with the Atom, or whatever, and the Metal Men, or the Doom Patrol, and those are like some really cool, crazy stories as well that ended up, a lot of them inspiring the really wonderful Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon show from the 2000 and early 2010s, I think it is. Like it's way after the Batman animated series, way after Batman Beyond, but it's this the fellow who's kind of the showrunner, James Tucker. It's a real love letter to guys like Bill Finger, to Dick Sprang, there's a writer named Bob Haney. There's an artist named Jim Aparo. These are like the classic writers and artists for the 70s. And then, of course, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, who are the guys that essentially make Batman dark again, like the first time. Because in the 40s and the 50s and then the 60s and some until about the early 70s, Batman is getting more and more like the TV show, like kind of corny and campy, and the pows and the zaps and the bams and everything is, it's comic books. It's very brightly colored, but the stories in the 50s and in comics in general, there was this thing called, or this guy called Dr. Wortham, Frederick Wortham, who essentially said comics are creating juvenile delinquents, and Batman and Robin are living a gay homosexual relationship, and comics that feature crime and vampires and voodoo and all this stuff that were particularly in there was a company called EC Comics, and they were like the top selling company at the time, and this all of these things that this quack, we find out years later that he faked a lot of data and he was just a real piece of work. It put this company EC out of business, and they kind of had the last laugh because they eventually put out Mad Magazine. That's who the EC guys essentially became. Mm-hmm. But as a result, DC was terrified, and all these other companies were terrified of the wrath of the mother. And so they said, all right, well, we're going to self-regulate. We're going to create a thing called the Comics Code, and we're not going to have crime stories, and we're not going to have vampires and voodoo and people getting needles shoved in their eyes. We're going to sanitize comics. And so as a result, Batman ends up like fighting space aliens and like getting turned into a baby and like a lot of weird, trippy, a lot of it is like him waking up and going, "Oh, it was all a dream," or it was a story that Alfred had written, or something like
Right.
that. And so it was.
So it was like the Hays Code, and then but
absolutely.
it took like 20 or 30 years for them to bring back Dark Batman, right? Is that
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so guys like the late great Denny O'Neil, who is one of the greatest, Batman and comic book writers of all time, him and then the artist Neil Adams, who owns a store right down the street in Burbank, a comic store.
Nice.
They were like fans of the old Batman, the 1939, 1940s Batman. And so they're like, we want that Batman. Let's bring back that kind of scary, he lurks around. He's, kind of hunched over. He's in the shadows and he'll pop out and scare the bad guys and that really cool version of it. And so they bring back this version, first in Brave and the Bold. It's mainly Haney and O'Neill and Neil Adams is drawing it. And then they finally get promoted, because that's what happens in comics is teams will get promoted. Kind of first they'll start off on some junky book that nobody is reading, and then they'll make it great. And then the uppers at the company will say, "Oh, let's get them on our main book because those are the respectable titles." So so O'Neill and Adams go on to Batman, and this is where they create Ra's al Ghul, and this is where they do the famous story where Joker throws Batman into a shark tank, called the Five-Way Revenge, which has a wonderful cover of Joker holding this playing card and Batman is strapped to it. It's perfect, iconic image. And all these, this kind of lasts for about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, this run. But it really, my generation grows up on that version of Batman. And so that's the other version that I fall in love with is the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil version. So in my head, I have kind of these conflicting, like there's room for multiple Batmans in my brain canon. There's this kind of happy fighting Joker on a giant typewriter, Dick Sprang version. And then there's this grimmer, Joker's got him chained to a shark version from Denny O'Neil,
So what are your favorite, we're pushing, we got 10 minutes here. Scott Rogers. I'm so sorry.
I haven't even talked about the Killer Moth yet. My favorite Batman villain.
Well, what I am curious of, and we can close on that if you like. But what I need to know is what are the characteristics of Batman that drew you to Batman? I mean,
well, Batman has the best costume in comics. That's number one. He's amazing looking, right? The cape and the ears and everything about him is cool looking. You wanna look at him and you want to dress like him. Right? So if you could dress up like Batman, just stare at yourself in a mirror all day, that would be the dream. Right? But it doesn't stop there. Gotham City is an interesting place, and a lot of writers have added to it and made it an interesting place. But I think ultimately for me, Batman has the best rogues gallery in comics. He's got, you go 12, like some superheroes, you get maybe 6 villains deep and you're like, okay, I can't think of really anybody good. Like Superman has a horrible rogues gallery. It's terrible. For one of the greatest characters in American literature, he has such dumb villains. Some of them are just terrible. But the only character that rivals Batman is Spider-Man. Spider-Man has an amazing rogues gallery as well. But Batman, his characters are scary and they're messed up. But they can also be played for kind of fun. Like the Joker works as kind of a silly clown character, but he also works as a homicidal psychopath. And I think that flexibility is what makes them, and visually they're amazing, right? Like people love to draw those characters and little kids love to draw them, like if a little kid wants to draw your character, you're onto something.
Right. So is it the fact that because Batman's, my favorite Batmans are the one where he's smart,
Yeah.
He's smarter than the bad guys.
Batman works in so many different genres. That's the other amazing thing about him. I think it's a Frank Miller quote. He says, Batman is the unbreakable diamond, which is you can put Batman in any situation, put him in any scenario, any story genre, and he always works. You could do a romance story about Batman, it would work. You can do a horror movie story version of Batman, it works. You can do a sci-fi version of Batman, it works. You can do a hard-boiled crime version of Batman, it works. And you can even change his costume around. I mean, if you're a toy collector or or a comic book reader, Batman has like a bazillion different visual versions of him, right? And yet it always works. There's something about that silhouette of Batman that is so powerful and just so captures the imagination of fans that it's amazing. It is a near perfect creation.
Okay. Wow. Fair enough. But I have to say, so he can be anything. He can be a detective.
He has been
can
anything.
be. All right. So
he can be for kids. He can be for adults. He can be for anybody.
Okay, so he's in space. He's solving crime. He's a scientist. He's a computer genius.
Yep.
He's an athlete. He's. I'm trying to think of is he a mechanic? Is he an engineer?
Yep. Sure. Delta Batmobile, right?
Okay.
In some stories. In other stories, they have some writers have kind of gone, well, this guy can't be everything. So
everything
they've kind
to
of
everyone. Yeah.
Right. So sometimes they expand it out. Like there are stories about other people that have built the Batmobile, but in some versions, Batman has built it.
Right.
There are, Batman, of course, has even though he's a loner, Batman has a huge family of just in the current version of Batman, it's Batman, it's Robin, it's Nightwing, it's Tim Drake Robin, it's his son Damian Wayne, it's Batgirl, it's Spoiler, it's the Black Bat, it's Batwoman. He's got this amazing
lone wolf. He's a terrible lone wolf because he's surrounded by humanity.
Right, he's full of crap when he says, "Oh, I'm a loner." And this is the thing that as a Batman fan, sometimes I get a little intolerant with fans that are like, well, Batman has to be this one thing. And that's like I said, that's the thing that I love about the character is that it can be the Batman can be so many things. It doesn't even have to be Bruce Wayne under there. It can be Terry McGinnis like it is in Batman Beyond. It can be, there are millions of, multiverse stories where other people are Batman. There's even stories where Superman is Batman,
Okay, yeah, because if Batman's sick, someone has to come in and take over the mantle of Batman.
There's
and Batman gets old, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. There's stories where like The Dark Knight Returns is the classic. It's essentially the Dick Sprang version of Batman old, and it's the 80s, and the city has gone to hell, and Robin is dead, or at least we don't know what quite happens to him. But Batman realizes that the only way the city is going to kind of right itself is that he's got to come back and be Batman again. And so that was kind of the start of the renaissance or the resurgence, I guess, of Batman between the 1989 Batman movie and Dark Knight Returns. Well, just really Dark Knight. There's 4 books, but everybody calls it Dark Knight Returns. It's one of my nerdy sticking points. But yeah, those two are kind of this moment in time within about 3 years of each other that really catapults Batman to. I mean, Batman was already world famous by that point, but this like really hyper accelerates. The story is this: I'm in college. I have been going for 2 years. I wear Batman shirts like at least once a week when I was there. Nobody gave me a second glance. 6 months before summer 1989 rolls around, I'm wearing Bat shirts. All of a sudden, I'm the most popular kid in school because everybody's like, "Oh my God, you're wearing a Batman shirt and you're excited for that movie, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Dude, I've been a Batman fan since I was 3. Okay,
right? Don't try to invent. Yes.
Welcome to the club. Now, I don't want to be a gatekeeper. That makes me sound a little gatekeeper.
No, right. And there's plenty of room on the bandwagon, you guys. Plenty of room on all bandwagons.
That's the other great thing about Batman. Everybody's welcome. Come and join. Come and play in Gotham City. It's a terrible place to live, but at least it's interesting.
Okay, now I think I want you to tell me your Moth supervillain before we go.
Moth.
Yeah.
All right. So real quick. So the Killer Moth is the anti-Batman. His origin story is that he's a crook. He's in jail. He reads a newspaper about Batman, and he's like, "Batman's got a pretty good racket." He shines the bat signal, and all the criminals get all freaked out and they run away. And he says, "But what if I were the Batman for criminals?" So he gets out of jail. He essentially assumes the identity of a multi-millionaire called Cameron Van Clear. And he has a Moth cave and he has a Mothmobile, and he's got a gun that shoots cocoon. Well, later on, he has a gun that shoots cocoons. But
wait, it's weird that he pretends to be also a multimillionaire like Bruce Wayne.
Well, how does he afford all? Like, they've never.
Yeah.
This is a story. If DC were to hire me, that's one of the stories I would want to tell. Is like how the Killer Moth got his cash, and so
he invented Post-its. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So he goes to all the criminals and he gives them all these flashlights, little miniature spotlights, and he says, "All right, whenever you're doing a crime, shine. If the cops are coming after you, shine this in the air, and I will come down and I will beat up the cops for you for like 30% of the take." And they're like, "Deal." So the Killer Moth essentially becomes the bane of the cops. What? He's the Batman for criminals, and then of course this puts him in conflict with Batman. So they fight, and Batman wins, of course. But then a few issues later, the Killer Moth is like, his cover for Cameron Van Cleer is blown. So he's now got to find another millionaire to impersonate. So he says, well, I'll be Bruce Wayne. So he goes and gets plastic surgery to look like Bruce Wayne. And he's running around as Killer Moth. He's running around as Bruce Wayne. They catch Batman. They unmask Batman. They go, hey, Batman's Bruce Wayne. And then, like, Batman runs away or something. And then Killer Moth comes in looking like Bruce Wayne. And all the bad guys shoot him because they're like, oh, that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Let's kill him. And so poor Killer Moth gets all shot up and is technically dead. But the thing about the Killer Moth is he keeps showing up. He keeps popping. Like, Killer Moth has had more. At one point, Killer Moth had more appearances in Batman comics than the Riddler and Scarecrow and even Two-Face.
Who made Killer Moth?
He was written by Bill Finger, and he was.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm sorry. He was written by. No, he was drawn by Lou Sayre Schwartz was the artist. No, he was created by I think it was Bill Finger.
What year is this?
1904. But no, the issue is Batman 73. So I want to say it's the late 40s, it's probably the early 50s. It's probably like 52 or somewhere around there.
Killer Moth has been around since the early days.
Yeah.
I have never heard of Killer Moth.
Oh yeah. Well, if you want to learn more,
money on the table, you guys.
If you want to learn more about the Killer Moth, you can visit the only Killer Moth webpage on the internet, which is the Killer Moth Appreciation and Preservation Society, which is my website that I've had around since like the 90s, and 1951 is when he first appeared in Batman 63. And the reason why I have a website is the writer Chuck Dixon was writing a tie-in to a series called Underworld Unleashed, where essentially the devil ups all the supervillains' powers. And he turns the Killer Moth into a giant bug monster that's called Chiraxes. And I wrote an angry letter to Chuck Dixon, and I said, look, I know it's probably not your call. It's probably the editor, but you're the person I can write angrily to. And I don't like that you've turned him into a bug, because a big drooling bug is not interesting. What's interesting is the anti-Batman. And I proceed to school him on, he probably already knew this, but I tell him about what I just told you. And he says... And he goes, well, if you like this Killer Moth so much, why don't you make a website about it? So I said, well, F you, Chuck Dixon, I will. And so I did.
What is
I made this. It is Killer Moth Society, I think blogspot.com. Hang on, let me double check that. But yes. And you'll learn about, I need to update it. Yeah, killermothsociety.blogspot.com /
Okay.
And in it, I highlight some of the major stories, and I need to, every time there's like a new toy or he appears in a cartoon or something like that, I say, hey, look, Killer Moth. And for a while I was kind of railing against a redesign that they did. DC went through a big redesign in the mid 2000s called the New 52. And the version of the Killer Moth is essentially just a guy with like a tank on his back and goggles. It looked terrible. It was a terrible design, and it was an insult to the name Killer Moth, because the Killer Moth dresses like a large bug. He's got bug wings, and he's got a green bug helmet with antennae, and he's got stripy, like pink and purple and yellow striped pants or orange striped pants. It's a hideous costume. It's totally ridiculous, but I love it. It is so great. And because of my love of Killer Moth, I have actually influenced toy creators to make Killer Moth toys. I influenced Mattel to make an action figure. I influenced Corgi to make the version of the car, and the HeroClix guys to make a little HeroClix miniature of it.
Scott Rogers, it has been an hour.
I know. Where did the time go? I'm barely even getting started.
You
on
are
Batman.
Rangers. It's Scott Rogers, who is the definition of plug and play when it comes to the Dork Forest. Bring up a topic and watch him zoom off. Is it at Mighty Bedbug on all the things?
Yeah, mostly at Mighty Bedbug on Instagram, on Twitter. I have a Patreon for if you like game design. Scott Rogers Designer on Patreon. I make. I'm a board game designer by hobby, I guess. I call it my jobby. And so if you want to support a game designer with making his prototypes, and I make every month a print and play game for people to play. So that's fun. And then I also
sold a bunch of games. You sold a bunch of board games, and
I have two that are out.
Scott Rogers.
The Patreon is Scott Rogers Designer.
Thank you.
My board games are Ray Guns and Rocket Ships and Pantone the Game. So if you like board games, I advise you to check them out. I do two other podcasts. I do one called Ludology, which I do a segment called Biography of a Board Game, which is the history of board games. And then I do another one with my daughter, which is called Fillory and Father, which is about the TV show The Magicians, which is a terrible TV show, but I get to spend time each week with my daughter. So that's nice.
Fair enough. Rangers, you heard it here. Well, this right now. And so follow at Mighty Bedbug, not the Mighty Bedbug. It's just Mighty.
No,
Bedbug.
just Mighty Bedbug. Yeah.
Yeah, and look for Ray Guns and Rocket Ships.
Yep, Ray Guns and Rocket Ships,
which is
and
fun.
Pantone the game.
Pantone, which I have not played Pantone, though we have it.
Oh.
And
well. All right. Well, then I don't have to send you a copy.
Don't send us a copy, because
right.
I believe we do have it. And we have learned many things about the Batman. And thank you so much for being on the show, Scott. Rangers, thanks for listening, and take care of each other out there.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?